Have you ever wondered what secrets lie behind seemingly perfect lives? The families that look like they have it all, wealth, success, and love, could be hiding unimaginable pain. Today we dive into the shocking story of David Reynolds, an admired ex-Marine, his wife Nancy, and the unexpected betrayal from the man they trusted most, their priest. This isn't just about infidelity or lies, it's about the dangers of misplaced trust and how the darkest secrets can come from those closest to us. In the quiet, picturesque town of Meadowbrook, the Reynolds family was a symbol of stability and respect. David Reynolds, a decorated ex-Marine who had served in multiple conflict zones, was now working as a high-profile security consultant for global companies, providing protection in dangerous areas. He was seen as a pillar of strength, discipline, and integrity, a man who had not only served his country, but also his family with honor. His wife, Nancy, was equally admired. She was the heart of the community, a loving wife and mother who was actively involved in charity work and volunteered for various causes at St. Mary's Church. She organized events, helped those in need, and was a warm presence wherever she went. On the outside, their marriage of over a decade seemed unbreakable. They had two beautiful children, Luna and Jack, who were the pride of their lives. They had the house with the white picket fence, the family dinners, and the community respect that everyone envied. But as the saying goes, you never know what goes on behind closed doors. Beneath this picture-perfect facade, Nancy was struggling. With David constantly away for work, often in dangerous regions for extended periods, she felt abandoned and increasingly isolated. She was left to care for their children and maintain the household while he was gone, but the loneliness gnawed at her, growing deeper with each passing day. Their conversations became brief and mechanical, filled with updates about the kids and logistics about David's travels. What they lacked was connection, true emotional intimacy. Nancy longed for it, but David was often too distracted by work and too exhausted to notice. Nancy's isolation was like a quiet storm brewing inside her. She loved her children, of course, but there was something missing. A sense of companionship, the deep connection she once had with David. She felt like she was no longer a priority in his life, as his work always seemed to come first. Their marriage had become one of convenience, of co-parenting, of duty. Gone were the late-night conversations, the laughter, and the romance. Nancy started to question whether David even noticed her absence, whether he missed her, or if he had moved on emotionally. She sought solace in her faith, turning to St. Mary's Church, where she had always been involved. It became her sanctuary, a place where she could momentarily escape the loneliness that haunted her. Nancy attended Mass regularly, volunteered in various church activities, and confided in the priests when she felt lost. But one priest, in particular, captured her attention: Father Mark. Father Mark was the new priest at St. Mary's. He was young, charismatic, and empathetic. From the moment he arrived, he captivated the congregation with his thoughtful and inspiring sermons. His voice carried a warmth and sincerity that made people feel understood, seen, and cared for. His energy was infectious, and his presence offered a refreshing change from the older, more conservative priests in the town. For Nancy, Father Mark was more than just a spiritual guide. He was someone who listened to her, who genuinely seemed to care about her struggles. Their conversations started innocently enough. Nancy would seek his advice on how to handle her growing feelings of isolation, her spiritual doubts, and her questions about faith. But as time passed, their conversations became more personal, delving into topics about her marriage, her emotional needs, and the emptiness she felt. Father Mark, in turn, shared his own struggles, talking about the challenges of being a young priest, the weight of his responsibilities, and the loneliness that came with his vocation. Their shared vulnerability drew them closer. Nancy began to see him not just as a priest, but as someone who understood her in a way no one else did. What started as innocent talks about faith and life quickly turned into something deeper and far more dangerous. Nancy found herself thinking about Father Mark constantly. She would make excuses to see him, to visit the church more often, to volunteer for additional tasks just to be near him. Father Mark, too, began to feel the pull of temptation. Though he had taken vows of celibacy and was committed to his spiritual life, he found himself struggling with forbidden desires. They began to meet outside the church. Long walks along the quiet trails of Meadowbrook, late-night phone calls that stretched into the early hours, and stolen moments when no one was watching. What had once been an emotional bond between them crossed a line, and soon they found themselves entangled in a passionate affair. For Nancy, the affair was intoxicating. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, desired and understood. Father Mark became her escape from the suffocating loneliness of her life, and every secret moment they shared was a reminder that she was still capable of feeling love, passion, and excitement. But with every stolen kiss, every forbidden touch, came the crushing weight of guilt. She knew what she was doing was wrong, not just as a wife, but as a mother and a devout woman of faith. Yet, the pull of Father Mark's affection was too strong to resist. In a small town like Meadowbrook, secrets never stay hidden for long. People began to notice the changes in Nancy, how she seemed brighter, more animated whenever Father Mark was around. Her frequent trips to the church became the talk of the town. Friends and neighbors whispered behind her back, exchanging knowing glances. Rumors started circulating about Nancy and Father Mark, but nothing concrete. After all, how could such a respected priest, a man of God, be involved in something so scandalous? David, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. He was focused on his work, often away on assignments that kept him occupied for weeks at a time. When he was home, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and he failed to notice the growing distance between him and Nancy. He trusted her completely, never once suspecting that the woman he loved could be hiding such a dark secret. But as the months went by, the signs became harder to ignore. It started with small things: Nancy's evasive behavior when he asked about her day, the way she would avoid eye contact when she talked about the church, the hushed phone calls late at night that ended abruptly whenever David entered the room. At first, David tried to brush it off, telling himself that he was overthinking things. He was a man of logic, after all, but the nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. One night, after returning from a particularly grueling assignment, David found Nancy asleep on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, so he took her phone and scrolled through her messages. What he found confirmed his worst fears. There, in plain sight, were messages between Nancy and Father Mark, some innocent, others far more intimate. The words cut him like a knife. He had been betrayed, not just by his wife, but by a man he had trusted, a man who was supposed to guide their family spiritually. David's world shattered in that moment. The betrayal was too much to bear, but instead of confronting Nancy right away, he decided to follow her. He needed to see for himself, to catch them in the act. The next day, when Nancy said she was going to the church for a meeting, David silently followed her. His heart raced as he parked his car a few blocks away from St. Mary's and watched her enter the church. From his concealed position, he waited, tense and alert. Minutes passed, and then he saw them, Nancy and Father Mark, standing too close, their faces inches apart, speaking in hushed tones. Father Mark reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from Nancy's face, and that's when David snapped. He stormed into the church, his heart pounding with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" David's voice echoed through the empty building, causing Nancy to gasp, and Father Mark to step back in shock. Nancy turned pale, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. David, this isn't what it looks like." But David wasn't listening. He had seen enough. His fists clenched, his body shaking with rage. Father Mark, realizing the danger he was in, tried to calm him down. "David, please, let's talk about this." But David wasn't interested in talking. In a blinding moment of rage, David lunged at Father Mark, his mind clouded with anger and betrayal. Father Mark panicked, grabbed a nearby crucifix and swung it at David, striking him across the face. Blood splattered on the church floor as David staggered back. But the Marine in him took over. Fueled by adrenaline, David charged again, this time knocking Father Mark to the ground. What followed was a brutal fight. Fists, kicks, and the sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the church. Nancy screamed, begging them to stop, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Then, in a final desperate move, Father Mark grabbed the crucifix once more and swung it with all his might. The blow landed on David's head, and he collapsed to the ground, blood pooling around him. Nancy fell to her knees beside David's lifeless body, her screams filling the church as Father Mark stood there, frozen in shock, the blood-stained crucifix still in his hands. When the police arrived, they found Nancy sobbing over David's body and Father Mark standing motionless, staring at the gruesome scene before him. He was arrested on the spot, his once respected reputation in ruins. As investigators combed through the church, they uncovered another dark secret. James, a young man who had gone missing weeks earlier, was found buried beneath the church. Father Mark's darkest secret was finally revealed. He had killed before, and David's death was just another tragic chapter in his twisted life. Father Mark was sentenced to life in prison, and Nancy was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The town of Meadowbrook, once so peaceful, would never be the same again. In the end, the Reynolds family became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be broken, and that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And with that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay tuned.